Welcome to the Orange Tea, where we explore what it means to be T-shaped professionals, broad in perspective, deep in expertise, and abreast of innovation. Hosted by Stephen M. Perry, founder of Kymanox, we unpack ideas that shape the future, build exceptional teams, and create lasting impact. From thought leadership on performance and wellness to insights into modern healthcare, this is your space to think holistically and grow intentionally, just like the people who make Kymanox a leader in the life science industry.
Hey, welcome. Today I'm with Nick Mandala, and we're on the next episode of the Orange Tea. Nick, tell me a little bit about your optimism for growth in life science, healthcare, even wellness. I know you've got some wellness habits like I do. And let me set that up for you. So I think you're familiar with Kymanox, and I think we play in this like three-dimensional space. And this three-dimensional space has a time component. So this is like early preclinical development, clinical development, that transition from pre to post market, which is commercialization, and then post market. And that's kind of the time element. There's a person element, which I think is really important. So this is just, scientists, engineers, compliance experts, all the people that are worried about regulatory and quality and clinical and medical. And then, project and program management. So that's kind of the axis of the who. Then there's the what. And I think these are the different sectors of life science. So this is like traditional pharmaceuticals. We call them small molecules often. Biotech. So this would be things including advanced therapies like cell and gene therapy. And then medical device, just strict, pure medical device. And then I think something that we both have a passion for is combination products. So a great example of a combination product is like a high value biologic, for example, in an auto injector or some type of dose delivery system. So there I've outlined the space. So that's kind of the playground to think about. Where in that space do you find like seams of optimism for growth?
Yeah, no, fascinating. First of all, thanks for having me on the pod, right? This is, it's really great to just sit down, have a chat and a talk and see where it takes us. And the growth conversation is a really fascinating one in 2026. So as we're coming firmly post-COVID, post-pandemic, and we're starting to see really the science that was not being done during the pandemic catch up again. And I think that's really important. So you think about, where big pharma, where biotech had been in the post-COVID environment, you typically have a 3 to 5 year time window between when the bench science is done and when you start to see new assets come to market. And during the pandemic, when everybody was home, when people were being safe and making sure they take care of themselves and their family and their colleagues and people close to them, you didn't have a lot of that bench science being done. And what did you see? You saw a pretty steep decline in terms of where U.S. market submissions and registrations were. At the same time, you saw sort of rapid growth in submissions from ex-U.S. Countries. And I think, and everybody's talking where we are in Chinese biotech these days. Yeah. So where now sort of the submission volume has flipped, where Chinese biotech have taken over the majority of submission volume in the US FDA. But the reasoning of that is really comes back to where we were during the pandemic. So all that to say, you're going to start to see this growth engine kick off again because the bench work, the wet science had been done when people started to come back to work. And so you're starting to see, and we'll put GLP-1 aside for the moment because that's an explosion of growth. But you're starting to see sort of the biologic space take off again. You're starting to see the small molecule space take off again, because those opportunities are there and the scientists are back doing science. And so in that growth space, you're also seeing that shift, that historic shift of where does top 20 pharma, top 100 pharma take risks? And so as you talk about growth from organically grown development and drug discovery, but you also talk about growth in the M&A space. So where you're starting to see sort of this bolt-on energy in the M&A space because you've had opportunities for companies to get to late-stage assets. And top 20 pharma, top 100 pharma are looking for risk-adjusted acquisition plays. And what that means is you're seeing less and less in the internal development, again, because bench science stayed home, more and more in the M&A growth because you had an opportunity for more nimble, more agile companies to restart the science, get to sort of those later stage demonstration of product performance and safety profiles, and then become a more attractive asset for M&A and big pharma. And so you'll start to see more in the M&A space. You'll start to see more in the licensing space, and you're already seeing sort of heavy licensing deals coming for big pharma with Chinese biotech, and that's going to really dominate what we're seeing in the first half of 2026. Then you start to see a bit more in terms of investment, right? And I think...
Yeah, and I wanted to kind of just talk about the investment piece,
go for
because on the investment side, what I'm seeing the last 2 years is the late stage assets are getting kind of the lion's share, and we're kind of starving some of the early stage. Yeah. So kind of two questions. One is, do you see that same trend? And is that playing out because of this post-pandemic, we got back to the bench work and now those are matured enough? Is that part of it? And then are we currently creating another mini pandemic by slashing government grant funding? And then kind of like the capital markets are kind of punishing the early stage companies.
And I think you said it, right? It's such a complex space, and all of these forces contribute to what the outcome is. So you have most favored nation pricing, you have tariff uncertainty within the U.S. market, you have bench science restart, you have capital and investment firm sort of very cautious and risk adjusted in terms of where their investment plays are. So all of that, to your point, is leading into heavy focus on late stage assets, less of a focus in early stage. But what does that mean, right? So that also contributes to sort of this rise of discovery efficiency and discovery speed. And so,
we're talking about AI.
There we are, right? So, as we get to the AI buzz, really AI buzz, and it started around 2020, but then really picked up 2023, when everybody needed an AI play, and folks were investing in partnerships, folks were investing in companies, and it started in discovery. It moved towards hospital administration. It moved towards patient assets and apps. And so as that AI gets further embedded into the discovery phase, and looking at protein selection and looking at molecule selection early stage, I think you're going to start to see the early stage clinical work being done at a faster clip. So you're going to see these nimble, agile companies adopt the AI strategy sooner and hopefully avoid that sort of second dip in science, where you're going to have that speed of science sort of increase rapidly because of the broad scale adoption and introduction of AI.
Yeah, I gave a talk in DC at the end of last year, and that was one of my main points was, don't be completely sad because AI is going to potentially kind of fill the gap, just as you said, on that early research, discovery, early development. And then hopefully we don't really miss a beat on getting what I think you and I are excited about, translational medicine. So like, can we get something to the patient, which is ultimately where you create value? I mean, it's wonderful to cure cancer in a rat, and we've saved so many rats.
But it's the safest place to be.
Yeah. But when you can translate it to, a family member, then now it becomes intensely personal and something that becomes a little bit more than just value creation. It's becomes like a purpose-driven, endeavor.
Well, and I think the changes and the early signal is when the government agencies are starting to adopt AI as part of their review function, as part of their audit function, as part of their assessment of safety events and post-market signals. As the agency becomes more adept in that space, they're more accepting of the AI that's coming through the pipeline, right? So you start to talk about developing validated algorithms and validated models. You start to talk about sort of the savvy that would exist on the review side that is complementary to what's happening in this nimble, agile drug discovery and drug development phase, where you have super smart folks in industry that are developing the science, and you have super smart folks on the agency side reviewing the science and being comfortable with it, where I think 5 years ago, you didn't have that level of comfort. Even as we got through computational modeling and simulation work, there was a bit of a disparity between those two phases, but now you see almost the agency accelerating the use of artificial intelligence, and then enabling industry to accelerate the use of artificial intelligence. And I think that synergy is really going to help with that, with avoiding a bit of that growth dip that would otherwise be projected over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. The other piece that we didn't really talk about, which is the acquisition and growth through M&A, really precipitated by patent cliff, right? So you're starting to talk about the 2028 to 2032 patent cliff that Big Pharma is facing, and sort of how does Big Pharma start to replace that revenue? So that also is one of that complex market dynamics that are contributing towards investment in late stage assets. So you're seeing all of these things converge at the same time and really bringing together sort of a focus on late stage clinical assets with high success rates for launch versus sort of that gap that you're seeing in sort of the early stage drug discovery phase.
Yeah. And maybe we'll table this idea, but I think when you think about the patent cliff, you immediately say, what new asset can we get? But if you look at, there's some great examples out there where someone was experiencing pressure from a generic and they developed like a companion diagnostic and patient interaction tool that created a stickiness with the drug, right? The treatment. And then it turns out that that branded product then really resisted erosion of market share just through that pretty simple app that's on the App Store.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that. So I think just for the record, I think Nick and Steven are optimistic about AI. It's not always a doomsday scenario. I know there's a lot of people out there that have a lot of anxiety about AI taking all of our jobs, driving unemployment to 90%. Let's talk about AI and robotics.
Yeah, but let's touch on that AI, that commentary, right? The doom and gloom commentary of the machines are taking over, be nice to Siri and Alexa whenever you talk to them because you never know. Yeah, the please and thank yous are super important, but it takes up a lot of computing space to respond to please and thank yous. But I think the key in AI is responsible and trustworthy AI, right? And so what you're going to see, and I always hesitate whenever somebody talks about AI as a cost reduction tool. I think that there's a challenge associated with that commentary because in order for AI to be trustworthy and responsible, the human in the loop model is necessary. And I think that especially in pharma, med device, biotech combination products, that human in the loop is not going away from a QA QC standpoint. So, to your point about, where does that bring us in terms of humans participating as in the discovery process and the development process and the commercialization and launch process. I think in essence, we all just need to be a bit more savvy in terms of how we're using these tools. We're not just using them as a search tool. We're not using them as a rudimentary tool. We're deploying them as a more advanced science tool that helps us get to better answers, but you still need human in the loop to verify the quality of that answer. And I think that those are really important steps and really important messaging to bring to the industry.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, you and I are both optimistic about the future. I think that's actually a good hallmark for leadership. And we'll get into some leadership questions, but let me go back to robotics and AI. So my nephew, he graduates in chemical engineering from the University of Illinois, which is one of the top chemical engineering school. And he said, Uncle Steven, I'm going to work first on AI robotics in the laboratory. And he's just dead set on it. And I know you've had some experience and actually have done it, either in, a development lab or in manufacturing. Can you just talk about robotics and how robotics is interacting with the industry?
Yeah. And I think this is the industrial automation, phase of all manufacturing and development and in this space. And this has been going on for the last 30 years, 40 years. And it's how industry adopts sort of that next phase and adopts it in sort of the smart way. I mean, I would love to be in a situation, especially in aseptic spaces, where you eliminate humans, where the humans are the biggest contributor to contamination in aseptic space. And so how do we position ourselves in a space where you have robots in that space? But the semiconductor industry has been doing it for decades, right? And it's a question of how quickly and how deftly is pharma and med device and biotech able to adopt strategies that are tried and true in other areas, where cleanliness is key, right? Semiconductor cleanliness is the utmost requirement in processing, right? There's no dirt, there's no specs, there's no
funny story, which you'll enjoy this. So I actually started my career in semiconductors. So I worked on AMD Fab 30 in Dresden, Germany. At the time, it was the world's largest wafer fab. And then I kind of got recruited into biotech. Yeah. And it was Abbott Laboratories, which is now AbbVie. It was kind of their version of biotech. And they had a bioprocess development pilot plant. And I got to kind of work in there. And it was literally going back 50 years in the past. And so I was really disappointed. And then I think you and I both share a passion for combination products. There's the 820 regulations, which is the medical device part of the regulations. If you actually look at where some of the risk management and some other principles on the quality management system, it actually came from automotive, right? And so that's how far we're behind. So people think biotech is like cutting edge, but if you look at just the chips that are in your TV or your smartphone or the stuff in your car, it arguably could be 50 years ahead.
No, and it's fascinating. I think that was my biggest response when I came into pharma, was looking at solutions that I'd worked on 10 years prior and people thinking about them as, oh, well, this is state of the art. And it's like, yeah, well, this was state of the art. But we recognize that we're sort of a very risk averse industry. Patients are the utmost important. Patient safety is key, right? So, in order for big pharma, and I guess I'm speaking on behalf of the whole industry, right? In order to make sure that the technology is safe, validatable, easily deployable, and make sure that we create the safest environment for patient drug delivery, we want to be able to check all those boxes. And I think there's a message in there, but when we get into sort of the AI and robotics space, right? If we are able to create safer drug products with the use of robots, with the use of AI, with the use of the technology that is at our disposal, then we really need to make the effort as industry leaders to push for that and make sure that it's easily validatable, easily adoptable, easy to put in use.
Let's pull on that thread on adoptable. Do you think it's going to be the labs, kind of like small batch manufacturing, or is people going to make big, bold investments in like the large scale manufacturing? Where is it going to get adopted?
I would love to see large scale manufacturing investment, but the safest play is to sort of build small, right? Start with lab-based automation, start with clinical automation. If you're doing clinical scale work, bring your connected devices, your connected sensors, your connected microcontrol and environmental control into the lab space. Prove out the technologies, right? So that if you can invest in that space, prove it out, make sure it's bulletproof before you then bring it to sort of your larger clinical scale manufacturing or your GMP commercial scale manufacturing. That's what you want to be able to do, right? And if there's solutions that are, even if you do a piecemeal solution where you demonstrate capability, performance, and competency, and then start to expand it to adjacent technologies, that would be the smart deployment way to go. Now the question is, do people have the time and the energy, right? Nobody gets promoted because they took the safest route. So I think what you'll see in industry, especially in a Me Too type space, is you're going to see somebody take a leap and say, yep, here's our state of the art. And so maybe that pivots us to infrastructure investment in the United States. So if you, over the last 12 months, we're tracking to almost $400 billion worth of pharma shovels in the ground, declared investments in U.S. infrastructure. And so the question then becomes is that the play, right? So are we going to see these beautiful state-of-the-art factories that are popping up across the U.S. because now we have this commitment to investment in infrastructure where the factories are smart factories. We can bring those into sort of the new era of rapid discovery, rapid manufacturing, and really sort of a fully connected, integrated supply chain and manufacturing process.
So that's another topic, which is reshoring, right? Oh, yeah. So you mentioned this, right? And you kind of brought us right to that topic. Is that an area for growth, or is this going to be like where we like overbuild and we're going to have like a boom followed by a bust? And is that an opportunity?
You said, let's stay optimistic, right? So, this is going to be a boom to be able to support all U.S. onshoring, right? And be able to really invest in what we're doing in pharma in the U.S. And if it becomes a bit of an oversupply, it just creates opportunity for those next stage companies to be able to come in, easier access to market with state-of-the-art facilities, right? So I think that ultimately you wind up, whether it's a boom or bust scenario, you wind up creating opportunity, right? So it might not be the opportunity for the companies that are creating the infrastructure today, but it becomes built-in infrastructure for that next wave of whatever that next drug is that needs to get to market. And if you shave off the 5-year build time for the infrastructure build, and you allow these companies the access to bring those products to market that much faster, that's a huge win for patients, right? It's a huge win for customers that are looking for life-saving medicines and breakthroughs.
Yeah. I think with the uncertainty of a particular pipeline at a drug sponsor company, so these are the top 20 biopharma organizations, should they be the ones that are putting the max amount of money in because they have the cash, or should it be the CDMOs, the contract manufacturers, that are trying to get over leveraged, knowing that they can slot in anybody who is willing to, pay the fee to be, in the plant. So how do you feel? Cause I feel like a lot of that billions of dollars is coming from like the blue chip.
It's coming from big pharma. Yeah. No, and you're absolutely right. The billions of dollars is coming from the top 20 pharma, right? So when you talk about the numbers of investment, that's all coming there. But the CMOs and the CDMOs are doing the same work, just not with the same level of fanfare. You're seeing capability builds in all across the United States to be able to expand, what the production needs are of the go forward markets. You're seeing sort of small molecule. You're seeing API come back to the U.S. You're seeing drug substance capabilities starting to get built in the U.S. again, and you're seeing sort of your aseptic fill finish capabilities come back too. I think where you see, and again, I think a lot of this is going to depend on what is the state of the go-forward administration, the tax structure, and the corporate benefits, right? So it all ultimately comes back to what are the incentives at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level that allows us to sort of bring a lot of this reshoring projects and programs to fruition.
Okay. So let's back away a little bit and just get to know Nick Mandala a little bit better. And I think we share a lot of great things. One of the things we share is leadership. So you've run some pretty big organizations. You've had a pretty big, budgetary authority and have had to manage people both inside and outside of the organization. What tips do you have for these emerging leaders? So these young leaders where you learn things like delegation, managing that relationship between giving trust, earning trust maybe, and then ensuring accountability. And then I think also just like, I think you and I are both pretty technical. We like to get we're not afraid of rolling up our sleeves, but like, how do you just be comfortable knowing something and not getting pulled into doing it? So all from like a leadership perspective, imagine you're talking to a 30-year-old who's on a fast track to make VP. What advice do you have for that 30-year-old?
I know we're not supposed to talk about age, but I am talking to a 30-year-old that's on no? Did I miss that? No, I think it's a fascinating question, but there's secret sauce to leadership, right? And I think the biggest change that leaders have to go through is that graduation from individual contributor, subject matter expert, the person that really knows the space, into a person that's capable of leading and enabling in the space. And part of it is letting go, right? Knowing how many different ways something can be done, right? I think the natural reaction is quality management, technical operations. There's a reason that there's 10,000 different ways to deploy these solutions, is because they're all right to a certain extent, right? It all focuses on the capabilities, competencies, and technical acumen of the organization. There's a reason why everybody does it a bit differently, right? And they're responding to the foundation that's there. And I think leadership is so important to listen and make sure that you recognize that. The other piece, especially as companies are going through rapid growth or rapid reduction, right? There's a lot in there. And you talked a little bit about trust. And trust is so super important because you need to build a space and a culture where you can create what can we control, right? What's our sphere of the sphere of influence, right? So what can we control? What can we influence? and what's beyond our control, but we need to create a safe, stable place for people to continue to learn and grow and operate without a fear of what's beyond our sphere of control. And I think it's coaching organizations and building teams that are comfortable working in that space. I think the other, and maybe the pandemic was a bit of a respite, but organizations go through change constantly. I mean, if anything's constant, it's change. And so to build teams that are comfortable with being uncomfortable, being in that unknown space. And I think the technical side is really great because scientific folks are always comfortable with not knowing, right? That's part of the exploration. It's part of the journey. It's part of the excitement. And so by building culture within folks that are technically oriented, that are scientific by nature, you kind of start with, there's so much more we don't know. And there's so much more we want to know. And so in some cases, it's easier building that culture of stability in the face of the unknown when you have folks that are very analytical in their thought process as part of your team. And that I find has been really helpful. I think partnerships is sort of key. So you talk about partners, a bit in terms of building leadership teams. But partnerships have such a broad application of use, right? So I think every leader needs to have internal partners within their organization, thought leaders that they go to be able to help them. And they need to have external partners that they go to, thought leaders that they trust. So they need to have their circle that exists both internally and externally within the organization. And I think that from a leadership perspective, it's important to identify with executive leadership, right? So where are the executive leaders that you model behaviors on, and how do you fall within that process? And one thing, I'm a big fan, is that we build legacy, right? So legacy is a really fascinating concept for me. And I think of it in terms of football coaching trees, right? You think about when I was growing up, you always heard about, there's Bill Walsh's coaching style, and then there was Bill Parcells' coaching style, and now people identify with Bill Belichick coaching style. And you think about who are the offensive coordinators and defensive coordinators that come out of that coaching tree, and how have they gone on to success, right? And I feel like strong leaders in this space start to develop that coaching tree. And one day I want to be able to look back and for people to say, oh yeah, I worked in Nick's organization, or I worked for Nick, and this is what I learned. Oh yeah, I learned that too, because I worked for him when we did this project, and it was really beneficial. And I think building that concept of legacy and being able to pass on as much information as we know to try to fast track the leadership growth for that next generation of really superb leaders in this space. So, I might date myself a little bit, but you think about like sticking a USB stick into your brain and being able to download all of that leadership knowledge, technical knowledge, the experience, and be able to empower that next leadership tree to grow up and sort of then spawn their own leader style, and spawn their own sort of hierarchy of who they're coaching on their journey.
Yeah. I think the last 2 years I spent a lot of time with executive and performance coaching. And one of the things that came up was level 3 leadership, which is like you lead in such a way that the next leader that is taking over for a program, the company, the department, whatever, it runs it with the same maybe effectiveness, but not necessarily the exact same how.
Yeah.
So I think like one of the things I've learned is just to back away and not critique the how so much. Get mutual agreement on the what, and then have some level of accountability and give people enough time to figure it out. Let's talk about failure. So let me give you just my perspective on the difference between scientists and engineers. And I know you've managed both and you probably identify with both, but I feel like scientists are very curious. They run an experiment. It fails. That's where they learn. Because like if the experiment went exactly as planned, they wouldn't really have learned anything. So that's where like all their discovery, that's where all their learning happens. And they're in this constant pursuit of why and how, and like getting into the details. Whereas I think the engineers are like, I want to be perfect. I want to set up the perfect system. Everything's based on, 99.999% success. And if, an engineer is running, let's say a commercial batch and the batch fails, like that's a bad thing. Right. And so how do you, from a leadership style, like manage people's failure so that you can turn it into a learning, which turns it into a win.
Well, and I think you just brought together sort of the perfect description of what is combination products, right? And I think that that's sort of that brilliant intersection between what is discovery and what is development, right? When you talk about drug product, you talk about discovery. When you talk about medical device, you talk about development, right? Purposefully, I think in some regard, because you have scientists that are working on discovery and engineers that are working on development. And as engineers, and this is the difference that you see between even how the regulations are designed and how people deploy quality management within their own organizations and technical operations within their own organizations. It's almost as though on the engineering side, you're sort of designing the process and you need to meet the requirements of the process. And to your point, if you don't get to the end of the process with a successful outcome, it's a deviation. It's a rework. It's something else new. If you do that same thing on the drug side and you get to the end of your process, you have a new indication, right? This is fabulous. I can't believe that this worked so well. In any other case becomes sort of a reportable event because something had happened that was different than the expected outcome. But ultimately that could be reconfigured into a new feature, into a new therapy, into a new target, for a particular asset. And I think that piece on, to your point on failure is allowing teams to learn through failure. One in particular, I think some of the most successful folks are the ones that are a bit action oriented and not afraid to fail, but learn from their failure opportunities to develop a better process, to develop a better product. And it's fascinating to watch that process work. And I think we all have different levels of risk tolerance as leaders, as organizations. And I think your level of risk tolerance changes. When you're an individual contributor, you might have a very high level of risk tolerance because there's not a whole lot of folks that are affected by the decisions that you're making. But as you get more and more senior within an organization, as you grow your teams, you start to figure out what is the ideal level of risk tolerance for you, because now you have responsibility for a much broader team, a much broader organization, a much broader company. And you almost feel personally accountable to each individual's success. So it's not just about you anymore. And that all comes back to that coaching tree model. Your success breeds the success of the people around you. So earlier, you might take bigger swings. As you get later and later in your career and later in your development, you might take more calculated swings. But in order to take big growth steps, you might take a calculated big swing, right? So how do you look at adjacent opportunities to be able to expand quickly? And, but you're assessing that risk a bit more.
Yeah. And I feel like if you get really successful and people want to protect their success, that's when they stop taking the swings. And then they're sad that stuff starts to erode. So one of the things I've been sharing with people is like, life is beautiful. Business is beautiful. You either win or you learn.
Oh, yeah.
So other than maybe, not paying attention on the street and you get hit by a bus, I mean, that's a pretty catastrophic situation. But other than that, it's like, it's beautiful because you're either winning or you're learning. And it's like, what else? Like, it's a beautiful time to be alive.
I love it. It's very action oriented philosophy, right? So I think what you have is sort of that plan phase and then the win and learn phase, right? So making sure that folks feel comfortable taking the chance, right? So what is it? You miss every shot you don't take, right? So you either make it or you learn from it.
Yep. Let's talk. You mentioned combination products. That's both near and dear to our heart. So I call combination products. I like a lot of friends, like they call it device engineering. And I'm like, I'm trying to, for the industry, I'm trying to change the vocabulary. So I've given a couple of keynote talks and I call it dose delivery systems.
Sure.
Right? And that's really meant to say combination product. And I think with dose delivery, everyone kind of like immediately goes to like prefilled syringe, auto injector. You think of like the PDA universe of prefilled syringes. And I think there's a lost opportunity there because there's so many different routes of administration. You can drop something in your eye. You can, put something in your nose. You can bring it into your lungs. You've got skin. You can do microneedles on the skin. You can actually deliver directly into the interthecal space or intracranial space with advanced dose delivery. So going back to this thing, like what you're optimistic about, where there's growth, let's talk about dose delivery and route of administration. What's in store for us in 2026 or like even the next couple of years?
And I think you bring up a really strong point in terms of where people identify combination products, dose delivery, drug delivery applications in the pre-fill syringe space, wearable auto-injector space, is because they're established. The path has already been blazed. And I think you have it now in inhalation, right? So I think nasal inhalation is an emerging market that a lot of people are familiar with. Narcan. A lot of people are familiar with Neffy, which is the epinephrine delivery system. And I think
it's needle free, which is for people who are scared of needles. That's important.
Yeah. Those that are needle averse. I mean, we've spent years designing hiding features in auto-injectors to solve that same problem, right? For those applications that,
and I think the risk profile is a little bit different from the FDA standpoint, because injecting something into your vein, right, or into your intermuscular or subcutaneous space, right, is a little bit different than just like putting it in your nose.
There's definitely a different bar. Sterility assurance
changes significantly.
No, and it's really fascinating. And I think as you think about it though, what is the easiest path to approval, right? And I think when you talk about speed to market, speed to launch, speed to adoption, you're looking at those well-established, those well-worn paths to approval. And I think companies that are looking at new therapies, companies that are looking to bring new products to market, you're focused on delivering value to patient in the quickest path. And so that's why you see pre-fill syringes will be around forever, right? And vials and syringes will be around forever. But now you're seeing sort of immediate launch into auto-injectors because it makes for better dose compliance, better usability in an at-home space. You see wearables where patients might want to receive medication in the comfort of their own home. It's better clinically. It's better for their stress level than being surrounded by wires and tubes and beeps and other folks that are going through similar challenges in terms of dosing and treatment.
Yeah. And I think you're referring to the death rooms, which are the chemo treatment rooms. Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't going to go there.
But that's a dark place. But like, if you can bring that somehow into a more friendly clinical setting or an at-home setting, I mean, that's a game changer.
Absolutely. And, there's bound to be scads of clinical evidence that talk about your stress level, and the improvement of your therapeutic outcome just based on sort of how your body responds, right? Stress leads to inflammation. Inflammation leads to a lot of bad things, right? That's why
they just had a study on this, Nick. So they said that people getting chemo in the afternoon were doing poorer responders than people in the morning. Part of it is their stress levels higher at the end of the day. So that accumulated stress from the day plus the stress from the chemo is too much. The people who got it in the morning, but if you've got it at home, you can schedule it when you're your best.
You're absolutely right. And it's an environment that's comfortable for you. And I think that's a strong position for why, as you look at the more advanced treatments and the next generation of treatments, we're always going to see pre-fill syringes. We're always going to see auto-injectors. Wearables have been coming on since the early 2000s, mid 2000s. So, wearables, the more and more will become the standard of care at launch. And now we're going to talk a little bit about it. I think you mentioned it earlier about the differentiation with digital health and connected applications.
Yeah. And let me just, as we go to digital, because that's where we're headed next, I just wanted to add, and I think you'll agree, but please chime in. I think the dose delivery system creates another opportunity for the people who are investing at the sponsor level, right? To have some additional exclusivity, right? So you can have a vial and a syringe, right? And that's a problem because you actually have to meter in the dose yourself. You have to administer the dose yourself. Much higher chance of like a needle stick injury, things like that, right? There's an opportunity to extend your exclusivity period by combining your drug or your dose, whatever your treatment is, with the delivery system. And then let's go into that next topic, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, where now there can be a digital component to this. So this could be a connected auto injector. It could be connected to an app. The clinician, the caretaker, the patient can see, oh, am I getting the dose at the right time, like the right frequency? It turns out Humira, the number one biologic of all time, the number one reason Humira was not working and still today why it doesn't work is people don't take Humira. But if you had the accountability built in and people had to either interact with an app to say when they took it or didn't, or you had the auto injector report back if it was being used on a strict weekly basis, that solves that number one failure mode why Humira doesn't work.
I mean, this is a topic that can be its own separate podcast series of podcasts in terms of how this technology enables treatment. And I think it stems anywhere from the companion applications that are looking at monitoring. So you see it very much in the diabetes care space and where you have glucose monitors connected to pumps that are doing real-time analysis and calculation in terms of where a patient needs to be to stay within the range. And I think that's an incredibly brilliant breakthrough technology, right? How do you create an external pancreas that essentially saves lives, right? So I think that if you can take that application and
let me add to that.
Yeah.
It returns you to a normal life.
Yeah.
So you get the lifespan, but then you get the health span where you can be kind of like a normal member of society. Right.
And how do you apply that chronic disease treatment across the board? Right. And I think from a patient well-being and a patient health perspective, that's so important. And as you look at our biologies are different, right? Our makeups are different. The way in which we process drug is different. And everybody's a bit different in how they interact with the drug product. And is there a way to link together sort of the clinical outcome, the dosing, the way in which your body is interacting with the drug, and being able to get to personalized precision medicines across the board. And that couples together all the things we're talking about. That couples together your dose delivery or your drug delivery system. It couples together your application in the digital health space that allows you to interface within your process, connects all the products together. It couples in your diagnostic, right? What type of diagnostic are you using in the space to be able to monitor performance and therapy outcomes? And I think that's where we're Star Trek. We're back in the Star Trek phase, right? You're getting scanned by a wand and it's telling you everything that's wrong with you. And at the same time, it's adjusting your therapeutic dose to be able to support better clinical outcomes. I mean, that's where we all want to be, right?
And it's not just the dose, right? I think it's also, hey, am I getting to bed on time? Am I getting enough sleep? I'm getting sleep consistency.
Yeah.
So it's all the wellness things that you can just make the drug work better for you. And then maybe minimize how much you need. I mean, I think blood pressure medication is a great example. There's a lot of lifestyle things you can do to lower your blood pressure. So if somebody can create a customized dose based on that day or that particular person's lifestyle changes, that's something that's well within the digital capability space.
I think we just came back to stress management, right? And how do you manage stress? How do you manage inflammation? How do you manage the way in which you take care of your body to be able to support it? And I think this is where, that whole sector of wellness applications, right? We reward people that seek medical treatment to be able to support whatever chronic disease or acute disease that they're dealing with. How do we now start to reward those wellness steps that people are taking? And I know a lot of big companies are starting to do this with wellness reimbursement, but I think that's super important. Mental health and wellness is going to solve a lot of problems before they become prescription related solutions.
So to bring us home, Nick, what do you think that merger between life science, healthcare, which is the administration of life science, usually in a hospital setting or some type of clinical setting, and then this wellness space? And there's a lot of quacky stuff going on in the wellness space. If you guys follow like Brian Johnson, who's like the N=1 number most tested person on the planet, there's some pretty out there things you can do for that still fall under the category of wellness. What's happening in 2026? Like, what do you see happening, and how would you guide people in the industry to pay attention to this?
Well, I think the 2026 trends are what we might all expect, right? So when we get to 2026, we're talking GLP-1s, right? We're talking sort of that space of the targeted healthcare, but then we're also seeing the reemergence of women's health, right? We are also seeing the reemergence of the rare disease space and the oft overlooked orphan drug space. We're starting to see a lot of these investment opportunities come back again in that post-pandemic bench science, wet science space that has finally caught up from a timelines perspective. So a lot of the areas that we haven't really talked so much about over the course of the last 5 years are resurfacing as growth opportunities. And I think that's really healthy because I think that brings to market, potentially overlooked sectors of healthcare, wellness, et cetera, that allow us better patient care, that allow us better patient access. And I think the digital health space becomes the game changer, right? It allows everybody better education and understanding of their own state of affairs, right?
Yeah. And let's just look at that GLP-1, right? So the GLP-1, you can potentially lose 50 pounds by taking one of the GLP-1s as an injection. And we'll see exactly how the pill works out for the people that are want to try the pill, which we know it's not as clinically effective, but man, it's convenient.
Well, but before we go down that path with bold statements, let's see how other folks come to market over the course of the next couple of months. We want this to age well.
Yeah. So I think if you look at the GLP-1 scenario, there's two problems. One of them is compliance. So people will start a GLP-1, they'll get some of the side effects, they come off. I feel like the compliance piece can be easily mediated with an app that's kind of coaching you and say, yeah, this is kind of normal. You're going to get a little bit of indigestion. You're going to get some of these side effects. Just stick with it. Your body's changing. And then I think there's a muscle loss problem. So when people are losing all this weight, they're also losing some muscle. We know that muscle loss is not good. So you want to go into your 75th birthday with as much muscle on your body as possible. So that's another thing that you could use with some type of digital health, digital wellness application to get people to do a little bit of strength training, make sure the calories they are eating is rich in protein. Do you feel like the GLP-1 is like the great example for where 2026 may see some wins?
Well, and I think it's also a question of what does the expanded indication list look like for a drug like a GLP-1, right? And it's the expanded indication list that are solving the underlying health problems, not just obesity related.
It's like all cause mortality almost. Right? You solve obesity and you wipe out type 2 in a lot of cases.
Exactly. And I think that's the value driver, right? And I think that holistically we talk about obesity because yes, it contributes to all the things that we know are wrong, right? Your heart works extra hard because it needs to support sort of additional weight. It needs to support all the work that you're trying to do every single day. And so there's a lot of benefits from attacking the treating for obesity, but all of those ancillary benefits, all of those expanded indication lists, that's where we're really going to see the strength. And I don't think we're going to see that focus in that, to your point, the 50-pound weight loss. I think, there's probably a middling space where weight loss almost becomes the secondary outcome and your primary indication is, a better treatment of other underlying disease states. And, I can sacrifice 10 or 30 pounds off of my weight loss target, by focusing instead on what are the other ride along issues that are being solved for.
Yeah. And I think that ties it back to the payer, right? Because if you can solve with evidence that you're addressing one of these underlying diseases that is either caused by or amplified by obesity, you now get a payer behind you, which then makes the system work, right? So I think that's a great way to.
Now we're going to blow up the whole go-to-market model, right? Yeah, we're going to talk about insurance payer models. What are the reimbursement rates and how do we bring successful products to market in that space? But that's for another podcast.
Thank you, Nick. Appreciate it. Till next time.
Thank you for joining us on The Orange Tea. Remember, at Chimonox, we believe in small, capable, T-shaped teams driving innovation and progress through broad and deep thinking. Stay connected with us on LinkedIn, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or your favorite listening app. For more information about Chimonox, visit Chimonox.com. That's KYMANOX.com. Let's continue building and growing together with intention. Until next time on The Orange Tea.